The locked box. The box weighed exactly as much as a secret. Daniel Mercer knew this because he'd been holding it for 47 minutes, standing in the parking lot of Hargrove and Associates law firm, keys in one hand, the mahogany box in the other, unable to make himself walk to his car. The autumn wind cut through his jacket. Leaves skittered across the asphalt like they were trying to escape something. Daniel just stood there, feeling the weight of whatever Eddie had left him, and tried to remember how to breathe. 3 weeks, 21 days since they'd lowered his best friend into the cold ground of Millbrook Cemetery, and the grief still ambushed him at strange hours. At 2 a.m. when he reached for his phone to text Eddie something funny he'd seen online. At noon when he passed the diner where they'd eaten breakfast every Saturday for 11 years. At the precise moment, a song came on the radio that Eddie would have immediately, aggressively, and incorrectly claimed he'd introduced Daniel to first. "I found that song, man. I literally sent it to you in 2019. You sent me the wrong version." "There is no wrong version of. The acoustic version doesn't count, Eddie." Daniel pressed his palm flat against the lid of the box. It was locked, as Mr. Hargrove had said it would be, with a small brass padlock that looked almost antique. The lawyer had handed it over with a somber efficiency, the kind of careful, practiced sympathy that Daniel imagined law school either taught you or broke you into learning. "Edward left specific instructions," Mr. Hargrove had said, sliding the box across the polished desk. "He said, and I'm quoting directly here, Daniel is the only one who'll know what to do with this. He'll figure out the lock. He always figures things out, even when he pretends he doesn't." Daniel had stared at the box for a long time in that office. Mr. Hargrove had folded his hands and waited. "Did he leave a key?" Daniel had finally asked. The lawyer had almost smiled. He said, again directly quoting, "There's no key, he already has what he needs." Eddie Callahan had been Daniel's best friend since the 3rd grade, when they'd been assigned adjacent cubbies and discovered simultaneously that they'd both packed the exact same lunch. Peanut butter and honey sandwiches, Funyuns, and a Capri Sun. They'd stared at each other's lunches with the grave, assessing seriousness only 8-year-olds can muster, and Eddie had said, "We're basically the same person." Daniel had thought about that sentence a lot in the last 3 weeks. They hadn't been the same person, not even close in many ways. Eddie was loud where Daniel was quiet. Eddie laughed first and thought later. Daniel was the opposite. Eddie collected friends the way other people collected coins, always adding, always making room, never losing a single one. Daniel had Eddie, a small constellation of decent acquaintances, and a cat named Premise who regarded him with the respectful indifference of a roommate who paid no rent and apologized for nothing. But underneath all of that, underneath the noise and the silence, the extroversion and the careful quiet, they had been, in the ways that mattered, the same person. Same humor, same stubbornness about the things they loved, same terror of the telephone, which they'd both hidden under layers of irony so thick neither of them had ever really admitted it out loud. Same loyalty, that above everything, the kind of loyalty that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. Eddie had died of a brain aneurysm at 34 years old. He'd been at his kitchen table, eating cereal, Cocoa Puffs, which Daniel could have told you without being asked, because Eddie had eaten Cocoa Puffs every single morning since the 4th grade, a fact that had horrified every woman he'd ever dated and delighted exactly no one's cardiologist. He'd been alive and then he hadn't been, and that was the entire brutal, senseless story. There was no warning, no chance for goodbyes, no chance to say the things you always assumed you'd say eventually when you got around to it, when the timing felt right. The timing never feels right. Daniel understood that now in a way he hadn't before, in a way that sat in his sternum like a stone. He finally walked to his car. He put the box on the passenger seat and drove home without the radio on, which was unusual for him. He usually needed noise. Today he needed to think. He already has what he needs. He turned this over and over as he drove. Eddie had been dramatic, wonderfully, infuriatingly, lovably dramatic, but he wasn't cruel. Whatever game this was, it wasn't a mean one. Eddie didn't play mean games. He played elaborate ones, ridiculous ones, ones that required effort and patience and occasionally a working knowledge of obscure 80s films, but never mean ones. Daniel parked in his driveway and sat for a moment. Premise appeared in the front window, assessed the situation from behind the glass, and departed. He already has what he needs. Daniel picked up the box and turned it over in his hands. The padlock was small and brass, the kind with a 4-digit combination, simple enough, but Eddie hadn't left a combination and the lawyer had no key and Daniel had. He stopped. He turned the lock so the dials faced him, 4 digits. He sat with this for a moment and then, with the peculiar, aching certainty of someone who has known another person for 26 years, he turned the dials to 311. March 11th. The date of their third-grade class trip to the Natural History Museum, where Eddie had gotten his jacket caught on a dinosaur exhibit, and Daniel had spent 45 minutes pretending not to know him while simultaneously being the only person willing to help get him free. They'd laughed about it for years. Eddie had a photo of it somewhere, the expression on Daniel's face, caught between mortification and helpless affection. The lock didn't open. Daniel tried 9/11 September, the month they'd both started at Millbrook Elementary. Nothing. He tried 1987, the year they were born. Nothing. He sat back against his car seat and pressed his fingers to his eyes. Come on, Eddie, help me out here. The grief hit him sideways, sudden and sharp. The absurdity of asking a dead man for help, the fact that asking felt so natural, the fact that he was sitting in his driveway talking to a box because Eddie Callahan had one last time refused to make anything simple when he could make it meaningful. There's no key, he already has what he needs. What did Daniel have? He had 26 years of friendship. He had 1,000 inside jokes and 100 shared memories and the complete knowledge of every embarrassing story Eddie had ever told at every party at Daniel's expense. He sat up. He turned the dials to 2811. November 28th, the date of the worst night either of them had ever had, junior year of college. When everything had fallen apart simultaneously, and they'd ended up sitting on the roof of their apartment building at 3 in the morning, not talking, just sitting until the sun came up and things looked not better, not fixed, but survivable. The night neither of them ever talked about directly. The night they'd never needed to talk about because it existed between them as a kind of shorthand, a reference point. We got through that, we can get through this. The lock opened. Daniel sat in his car for another full minute before he lifted the lid. Inside, on top, was an envelope with his name on it. Eddie's handwriting, that cramped, leftward-leaning scrawl that had somehow passed for penmanship all through school, that Daniel had spent years interpreting like a translator. Beneath the envelope, a folded piece of paper, a USB drive, a photograph, and a small object wrapped in a piece of cloth. He picked up the envelope first. His hands were steady, which surprised him. He'd thought they'd shake. Dan, if you're reading this, then either I'm dead or I staged an extremely elaborate fake-out to test whether you'd actually figure out the lock, and I think we both know I don't have that kind of patience. So dead right sorry about that. I've been trying to write this letter for about 4 months, which is how long I've known about the aneurysm. Yes, I knew, and yes, I didn't tell you, and I know that's going to make you angry for a while, and that's okay. I had reasons. They weren't all good reasons, but they were mine, and I'm asking you to give me this one. Daniel put the letter down. He looked out the windshield at his front yard. The oak tree in the corner had gone fully gold. He'd planted it with his father 15 years ago. It had been a twig then, a optimistic little stick in the ground. He picked the letter back up. I didn't tell you because I know you. I know that if I'd told you, you would have spent every single conversation we had after that trying to make it count, trying to make every moment into something meaningful, and the truth is our conversations were already meaningful. They've been meaningful for 26 years. I didn't want our last months to turn into a highlight reel. I wanted them to just be us. So we ate breakfast at Carver's. We argued about movies. You told me I was wrong about the Packers and I told you you were wrong about the Packers, and we were both right and both wrong in equal measure like always. You helped me move that bookshelf in March, remember? You complained the entire time and then you stayed for dinner, and we watched 3 episodes of that documentary series you've been recommending for 2 years, and I fell asleep during the second one and you let me and turned the volume down. Those were perfect days, Dan. I need you to know that. The ordinary ones, those were the ones. Daniel realized he was crying somewhere around the 3rd paragraph. He wasn't doing it loudly or dramatically. He'd never been a dramatic crier, unlike Eddie, who had been known to weep openly at commercials and then deny it with breathtaking conviction. Daniel cried the way he did most things, quietly, internally, with a private intensity that didn't ask for witnesses. He let himself. There was no one around. Even Premise had vacated the window. He kept reading. Now the box. The USB drive has 2 things on it, a folder called Practical and a folder called Personal. Open Practical first. It has my financial stuff, the bank account information, the insurance policy, the list of passwords for accounts that need to be closed. I know I could have given this to my family or to Hargrove, but honestly you're the only person I trust to handle it without making it weird or making it a whole thing. My sister means well, but she will make it a thing. You know she will. The personal folder is for you, not for anyone else, just you. Open it when you're ready, not before. The photograph, that's from the roof. November 28th. I had someone take it from the window of the apartment below us, I forget who, some girl from the third floor. I've had it for years. I always meant to frame it and give it to you and I kept not doing it for no good reason. I'm giving it to you now. I'm sorry it took me this long." The object in the cloth opened that last. Daniel unfolded the piece of paper next. It was a handwritten list, Eddie's cramped script filling the page in numbered entries. Things Daniel Mercer is wrong about. 1. The acoustic version does count. 2. Parallel parking is a skill, and refusing to practice it is a choice. 3. Premise definitely likes him, Premise is just performing. 4. He was right about Diane, he just wasn't right in the right way. 5. He is funnier than he thinks he is. 6. He is lonelier than he lets on. 7. He should call his mother more. 8. He should let people help him more. 9. He has been ready to take the job for 2 years, he knows which job. 10. He is not too much, he has never not once been too much. Daniel read the list twice. The 10th item hit him somewhere in the chest and stayed there because Eddie had known, of course Eddie had known, about the particular specific way Daniel had arranged his life around taking up as little space as possible. About the self-editing. About the apologies offered preemptively for existing too loudly, wanting too much, feeling things too deeply. Eddie had never commented on it directly in 26 years, because that wasn't how they operated. They spoke in shorthand and implication, in jokes and references, in the 10,000 ways two people who know each other completely can communicate without ever being explicit about the things that matter most. But he'd known, of course he'd known, and he'd written it down, item 10, because Eddie was gone and couldn't leave things unsaid anymore. Daniel set the list on the passenger seat with the same care he would have used with something fragile. He picked up the photograph. It was small, a 4x6 print, slightly faded at the edges, clearly printed from a digital photo taken on someone's phone sometime around 2008. The image showed a rooftop at dawn, the sky, that particular gradient of gray-pink that happens in November when the sun is reluctant. 2 figures sat at the edge of the roof, their backs to the camera, shoulders almost but not quite touching, looking out over the parking lot and the street beyond it and the city waking up at a distance. Daniel didn't need to see their faces. He knew which one was Eddie, the one with the ridiculous hair, the jacket that was too thin for November, the posture of someone who had decided sometime in the last hour that things would be okay. And the one next to him, a little taller, slightly hunched, hands in pockets, face turned very slightly toward the one beside him. The label on the back in Eddie's handwriting, 28/11/08, the night we didn't talk, the best conversation. He sat with the photograph for a long time. Then he picked up the cloth-wrapped object. It was small and oddly heavy, and when he unwrapped it he found a key, a regular house key, old, with a small tag attached on a piece of string. The tag read, "Mom's spare. She always meant to give it back. She'd like it if you checked in sometimes. She makes the good soup." Eddie's mother, Ruth Callahan, had fed Daniel approximately 800 dinners over the course of their friendship, and had once memorably told him that he was welcome in her home anytime because you're the reason my son learned to be a decent friend. Daniel had protested and she'd waved him off. He hadn't argued further because you didn't argue with Ruth Callahan, and because somewhere under the protest he'd filed away the compliment and kept it quietly for many years. He closed his hand around the key. That night Daniel opened the practical folder first, as instructed. He spent 3 hours working through it, methodical, careful, the way he did everything. He sent the necessary emails, made the necessary calls, organized everything into a folder on his desktop that he labeled Eddie Estate, and then almost immediately relabeled Eddie Admin, because the word estate made it sound like Eddie had owned a manor house instead of a 2-bedroom apartment with a leaky kitchen faucet and a remarkable collection of concert posters. When it was done, when everything had been handled as much as it could be handled in a single evening, he made himself a cup of tea, which he didn't really want, and sat at his kitchen table and opened the personal folder. It contained one file, a video 43 minutes long. The thumbnail showed Eddie sitting in what Daniel recognized immediately as the armchair in Eddie's living room, the green one, the ugly one, the one Eddie had found at a garage sale in 2015 and refused to part with despite the specific, dedicated campaign against it waged by everyone who had ever entered his apartment. Daniel pressed play. "Okay, so," Eddie said on screen, leaning forward and adjusting something off camera, probably the laptop angle, with the focused expression of a man who had very definite ideas about how things should be done and almost no technical ability to execute them. "Hey, hi, it's me." He sat back and looked at the camera, and he looked good. That was the first thing Daniel noticed, with a relief that felt almost physical. He looked like Eddie, not sick Eddie, not abstract Eddie, not funeral photo Eddie, Just Eddie, a little tired maybe, wearing the gray hoodie he'd had since 2011, the one with the small tear at the left cuff that he'd been meaning to fix for 4 years. "So I've been trying to figure out how to do this for a few months," Eddie said, "and I keep getting too dramatic about it, so I'm going to try to just talk. Like we talk. Is that okay? You're not here so I can't ask you, but I'm going to assume it's okay because you'd tell me if it wasn't, which is one of the things I like about you." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I've been thinking a lot about what I want to say to you. I have this whole list of things, serious things, important things, but I keep coming back to the fact that the most important thing I want to say is something I don't know how to say, which is that." He paused. "You made my life better, that's it, that's the whole thing. You made my life better every year consistently without trying particularly hard at it, which is the most impressive part. You made it better by being exactly who you are." Daniel had his elbows on the table. His tea was going cold. "I don't think you know that about yourself," Eddie continued, on screen in the ugly green armchair, alive in some past October afternoon. I think you operate like you're an inconvenience to people, which is the most incorrect thing about you. You've always been like that, even when we were kids. You used to apologize for existing in the lunch line. Do you remember that? You'd get behind someone and go, 'Oh, sorry, and there was nothing to be sorry for, you were just existing, being a person, but you always seemed like you were asking permission for it.'" He looked directly at the camera, which meant he was looking directly at Daniel, in that particular way Eddie had when he was saying something he wanted to stick. "You don't need permission, Dan. I want to say that clearly because I'm not going to be there to say it in other ways anymore. You don't need permission to take up space. You don't need permission to want things or feel things or be the full-sized version of yourself. You've been standing at half-height your whole life and I've watched it, and I should have said this more directly when I had the chance, so I'm saying it now." He leaned back. "Okay, now I have some notes." The notes took 27 minutes. They were exactly what Daniel might have expected if he'd known to expect anything. A combination of the deeply personal and the absurdly trivial, delivered in Eddie's specific cadence, the one that understood when to be serious and when to pull back from serious before it became too heavy to hold. There were things Daniel needed to hear. There were things Daniel had already known but needed to hear anyway. There were 3 separate extended tangents about minor grievances, the parking thing again, the acoustic version thing, a matter of principle apparently even beyond death, and an entirely new complaint about the way Daniel loaded a dishwasher, which Eddie claimed had been bothering him since 2016, and which he had apparently saved up for this moment, this final monologue, this last gift. Daniel laughed 6 times. He cried 4 times. By the end, he was doing both at once, sitting in his kitchen at 11:30 at night with cold tea and a cat who had materialized from somewhere and installed herself on the chair beside him, which Premise almost never did, as if she understood that tonight was a night for exceptions. The video ended with Eddie looking at the camera for a long moment without speaking, and then, "I'm going to tell you one more thing and then I'm going to go eat the rest of my Cocoa Puffs because I've been sitting here for an hour and I've earned it." A small pause. "Thing is, Daniel, the thing is you're going to be okay. I know you're going to spend a while not believing that, and I know you're going to try to deal with this the way you deal with everything, which is by handling all the external pieces very efficiently, and then sitting with the hard part quietly by yourself for too long. And I know I can't stop you from doing that, because you've been doing that your whole life and I'm not there anymore to come over with beer and terrible movies as a thinly veiled intervention." He smiled. "But you're going to be okay, not because you're fine, you're not fine, and it's okay to not be fine, but because you're someone who eventually, stubbornly in your own time, figures out how to carry things. You've always been that person. And you don't have to carry this alone even if you want to. There are people. Use them, use the key. Call my mom, let the people who love you be around you." Another pause, shorter. "I love you, man. I should have said that more. Say it more to the people you mean it about. Don't wait until you have a time limit." The video ended. Daniel sat at his kitchen table for a long time after. Premise remained in the adjacent chair, which was unprecedented. At some point she moved close enough to put one paw on his forearm, which was frankly a gesture he didn't know she had in her repertoire, and he put his hand over her paw, and they sat like that together in the quiet kitchen while the clock moved forward. He thought about the roof. November 28, 2008. The sky going from black to gray to that reluctant, hesitant pink, and Eddie sitting next to him in the jacket that was too thin, both of them having the best conversation by not talking, by just being present, just being there because being there was sometimes everything. He thought about item 10 on the list. He thought about standing at half height. He thought about the oak tree in the front yard which had started as a hopeful stick in the ground and was now, 15 years later, the thing that made the yard. He thought about Eddie eating Cocoa Puffs at his kitchen table on an ordinary morning, alive, and then not. He picked up his phone. He looked at it for a long moment and then he opened his texts and wrote to his mother, "Hi Mom, I know it's late just thinking about you, talk tomorrow." She replied in 40 seconds. She kept her phone on her nightstand, always had with, "Always, sweetheart, always." He set his phone down. He picked up Eddie's letter and read it through one more time from the beginning, slowly, not hurrying any of it. Then he folded it carefully along its original creases and put it back in the envelope. He looked at the photograph again, the two figures on the roof, the dawn arriving in spite of everything, and then he propped it against the fruit bowl in the center of the table where he would see it every morning. He picked up the house key and turned it over in his hand. Ruth Callahan's key. She'd like it if you checked in sometimes. She makes the good soup. He would go on Sunday. He would call first because Eddie had raised him right, metaphorically speaking. He would sit in her kitchen that smelled like his whole childhood and they would eat soup and they would probably cry and then they would probably tell stories about Eddie, the embarrassing ones, the funny ones, the ones he'd told at Daniel's expense at 100 parties, the ones that deserved to be kept alive. The ones that would keep him alive in the way that people stay alive. In the telling, in the remembering, in the way the people who loved them carry pieces of them forward. Daniel put the key in his pocket. He closed the mahogany box and set it on the kitchen counter. Tomorrow, he thought, he would call his mother. He would email his friend Sasha, who had reached out 3 times since the funeral and whom he'd answered briefly and efficiently, and then retreated. He would, maybe, reread the job description he'd been opening and closing and refusing to apply for over the course of the last 2 years, for reasons that felt reasonable and secretly weren't. He would figure it out, not all at once, that was never how it worked, but he'd figure it out piece by piece, the way he always did, stubbornly in his own time, carrying things forward. He would stand at full height. Outside, the oak tree held its gold against the October wind. The night was quiet. The photograph leaned against the fruit bowl, 2 figures on a rooftop watching the sun come up over something they'd survived, their shoulders almost but not quite touching. Daniel Mercer went to bed. He did not sleep for a long time, but when he finally did, he slept without dreaming, the deep, honest sleep of someone who has been given, even in grief, even in the middle of the hardest thing, a gift. The knowledge that he had been known. Completely, consistently, for 26 years, all the way to the end, known and loved and seen, standing at whatever height he stood at, taking up whatever space he took up. The box sat on the kitchen counter in the dark. Its lock hung open.